You realize that someone was all bark and no bite. I was 12 when my stepdad Mark gave me a cute nickname. And that was a lazy N word. You see, for 2 years straight, Mark had one rule. I wasn't allowed to sleep. While my white siblings could sleep from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was only allowed to sleep from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. Luckily, I didn't even have to set an alarm clock. Because every morning at 4 a.m., Mark would burst into my room with a flashlight in my face, checking if I was ready to do my character-building chores. This included scrub bathrooms, organizing the garage, having breakfast for when his boys woke up. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because if I made any sort of noise, I'd lose privileges. The privileges in question: eating enough food, drinking enough water. And since my mom worked 12-hour night shifts as a nurse, she never saw any of it. Mark had this whole philosophy about modern kids being soft. When I was in Afghanistan, he'd start every lecture: we functioned on 2 hours of sleep for weeks. Youths today can't even handle getting up early. I'm sure you can guess why. His rules only apply to me. By month 3, I was practically schizophrenic with how much I was hallucinating. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Hearing my name when no one called. I've fallen asleep on the toilet twice at my desk. Dozens of times, and once while standing in the shower. The other black kids at my school started calling me the raccoon. N-word because of the dark circles under my eyes. My grades made like a girl's chest during puberty went from A's to D's. All because I could stay conscious long enough to finish tests. Teachers thought I was on drugs and said I fit the stereotype. Even the counselor pulled me aside, asking if everything was okay at home. The breaking point came during midterms. I literally fell asleep standing up during my history presentation, face planted right into the whiteboard. 20 minutes later, the school nurse called my parents. And Mark showed up in his veteran's cap, like he was on a rescue mission. "This is what I'm talking about," he said, shaking his head in the nurse's office. "No self-control. I've tried everything: structure, discipline, consequences. Some kids just don't want to succeed." Counselor ate up every word. "I don't blame you, Mark. Most white folk wouldn't even bother trying to civilize a kid like this. You're fighting genetics here." I tried telling my mom when I got home, but she was exhausted after a double shift and Mark was right there, arm around her shoulders. "He's exaggerating," Mark said calmly. "Teen boys are dramatic. I'm just teaching him discipline." "Bruh. I only get 4 hours of sleep," I managed to whisper. Mark laughed. "See what I mean? The kid can't even keep his lies straight." My mom just sat there saying nothing. "Didn't your guys' ancestors used to spend all day in the cotton field? Anyway, you should be used to this by now." He then threw his head back and cackled. That's when I realized my mom was too scared of Mark to defend me. I wanted to call CPS, but I knew Mark would just sweet-talk his way out of it. So instead I did something I never done before. I went through my mom's jewelry box to find my dead dad's old phone. There I found his brother Jerome's number, texted him on my phone, and asked if he wanted to go on a run with me at 4 a.m. Mark would be at his peak performance by then. When he agreed, I felt a chaotic excitement fill my veins. So on Thursday night, I made sure to be extra lazy at dinner. Dozed off twice, knocked over my water. Mark's eye twitched with anticipation. "Looks like someone needs extra motivation tomorrow," he said, his voice snickering. At 4 a.m. sharp, the flashlight hit my face. But this time Mark brought props: bucket of ice water and an air horn. He was so excited to abuse me that he didn't even hear the front door open. "Rise and shine, you lazy N-word," he cheered. "Today we're trying something new, since you can't seem to be disciplined." He was then interrupted by the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. "What the F did you just call my nephew?" My uncle's voice bellowed through the house. Behind him, my cousins Deshaun and Terrell. Mark's flashlight swung toward them, his face draining color. The beam of Mark's flashlight, once a weapon of terror that signaled the start of my daily nightmare, now shook violently in his hand. The white light jittered across Uncle Jerome's chest. A chest that was roughly the size of a refrigerator door. "I asked you a question, tough guy." Jerome's voice was a low rumble, the kind of sound that vibrates in your teeth before you actually hear it. He didn't step into the room, he loomed into it. Behind him, Deshaun and Terrell, both collegiate athletes who looked like they'd been carved out of granite, filled the doorway, blocking any hope of Mark's escape. Mark's mouth hung open. The air horn, which he'd been so ready to blast in my face, dangled uselessly at his side. The bucket of ice water sloshed, spilling over his shoes. "Jerome? What are you doing here?" "It's 4 in the morning, Mark stammered. The drill sergeant bark was gone, replaced by the high-pitched whine of a man who realized he had brought a toothpick to a gunfight. "We're here for a run, remember?" I said, my voice cracking but steady. I sat up in bed. The exhaustion that had plagued me for months suddenly replaced by a shot of pure adrenaline. "You said I needed extra motivation, Mark. Well, here's my motivation." Jerome didn't look at me yet. His eyes were locked on Mark. He reached out and, with a terrifyingly slow movement, took the flashlight from Mark's hand. He turned it around, shining it directly into Mark's eyes. You like the light, Mark? You like waking kids up with this? Jerome asked. He looked at the air horn. And what's this for? You training a dog or torturing a child? It's discipline. Mark squeaked, shielding his eyes. He's lazy. He's failing school. I'm a veteran, Jerome. I know what it takes to. Thwack. Jerome didn't punch him. He simply flicked the heavy mag light against Mark's chest, a gesture of utter dismissal. Don't you dare wrap your cowardice in that flag. I know real veterans. You're a clerk who got a discharge because you couldn't handle the PT. I checked your records the moment my nephew called me crying last night. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's Afghanistan stories, the weeks without sleep, the heroic stance, were the foundation of his authority. To see it crumbled by a single sentence was like watching a building implosion. The commotion finally woke the rest of the house. My mother came running down the hall, her eyes bleary from her shift, followed by Mark's two sons, who looked confused and frightened. What's going on? Jerome. My mom gasped, clutching her robe. Look at your son, Maya, Jerome said, his voice dropping the aggression and replacing it with a heartbreaking sadness. He turned the flashlight toward me. In the harsh light, I looked like a ghost. The raccoon circles under my eyes were purple-black bruises against my pale, gaunt skin. My ribs were visible through my t-shirt. I was trembling, not from cold, but from the sudden release of 2 years of suppressed trauma. He gets 4 hours of sleep, Maya, Jerome said. While your husband here feeds his own boys, he's got my nephew scrubbing toilets and organizing garages on an empty stomach. He called him a lazy N-word not 30 seconds ago. My mom looked at Mark, then at me. Mark, is that true? Mark tried to recover. He put on his reasonable man face. Maya, honey, Jerome is exaggerating. The boy has a vivid imagination because he's always tired. I told you he's been slipping. He's slipping because you're killing him. Terrell, my older cousin, stepped forward. He walked over to my desk and picked up a notebook. He flipped through it. Look at this, Aunt Maya. This isn't homework. It's a log. Mark made him write down every sin he committed. Took 5 minutes too long in the shower, no lunch. Made noise on the stairs, half ration of water. This is psychopathic. My mother took the notebook. As she read, her face went from confusion to a mask of horrific realization. She looked at Mark as if she were seeing a monster for the first time. You told me he was just doing chores for allowance, she whispered. I was protecting him. Mark shouted, his ego finally snapping. He's one of them, Maya. If I don't break him now, the world will break him later. I was doing you a favor. The slap my mother dealt him was so loud it echoed off the hallway walls. It wasn't a dramatic movie slap. It was a desperate, angry strike from a mother who realized she'd allowed a wolf into her den. Mark staggered back, his hand to his cheek. For a second, he looked like he might strike back. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon that veteran intensity. You want to get violent? Mark hissed. I'll call the cops. I've got friends on the force. You're trespassing, Jerome. Get out of my house. Jerome laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. Call them. Please. Let's show them the bucket of ice water. Let's show them the discipline logs. Let's show them the hidden camera I noticed you installed in the hallway to make sure he wasn't sneaking food. Mark froze. The mention of the camera seemed to drain the last of his blood. And as for your friends? Jerome stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Mark whole. I already called a friend of mine. He's a detective with the Special Victims Unit. He's sitting in his car at the end of the driveway right now, waiting for my signal. So, you can walk out of here quietly, or you can leave in zip ties. Your choice, soldier. Mark's bravado vanished instantly. The man who had spent 2 years terrorizing a child with air horns and starvation turned into a puddle. He literally began to cry. I was just trying to help, he whimpered, sliding down the wall. I have PTSD. I'm not myself. You don't have PTSD, I said, standing up from the bed. I walked over to him, looking down at the man I had feared more than death. You're just a bully who found someone smaller than you to hurt. You're not a soldier. You're nothing. The next few hours were a blur of activity. My mom, fueled by a mixture of guilt and rage, threw Mark's belongings into garbage bags and tossed them onto the lawn. Jerome stayed in the kitchen with me, making me the biggest plate of eggs, bacon, and toast I'd ever seen. Slow down, little man, Jerome said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder as I inhaled the food. Your stomach isn't used to this much. We've got all the time in the world now. The police did arrive, but they weren't Mark's friends. They were Jerome's. They took statements. They took the discipline logs. They took the camera footage. The most satisfying moment wasn't when Mark was told he had to leave the premises. It was when the school counselor, the one who told Mark he was fighting genetics, got a phone call from the superintendent. Jerome had made sure the school board knew exactly what kind of civilizing the counselor had been encouraging. By 8 a.m., the house was quiet. Mark was gone, headed to a cheap motel with his sons, who looked more relieved than sad to be away from their father's erratic energy. My mom sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I was so tired, I trusted him." "I know, Mom," I said. And I did. Mark was a predator. He had chosen a woman who was overworked and vulnerable, and he had used his status to blind her. But it's over now. Healing took much longer. For the first month, I couldn't sleep. Even though Mark was gone, my body would bolt upright at 4 a.m., heart racing, waiting for the flashlight and the air horn. I would wander into the kitchen, and Jerome, who had moved into the guest room for a while, would be there already brewing coffee. "It's okay," he'd say. "Go back to bed. I'm on guard." My grades didn't recover overnight. I had to go to summer school to make up for the tests I'd slept through. But this time, I wasn't the raccoon. The dark circles faded. My skin regained its color. I grew 3 inches in 4 months because my body finally had the nutrients and rest it needed to actually be a 12-year-old. The school counselor was fired. A new one was brought in, a woman who actually looked at my bruises and my hunger instead of my skin color. As for Mark, he tried to fight the child abuse charges, but the discipline logs were his undoing. It turns out, when you document your own crimes in a spiral-bound notebook, judges tend to take notice. He lost his house, his reputation, and eventually his kids were placed in the custody of their biological mother. 1 year later, on a Thursday morning, I woke up. Not because of a flashlight, but because the sun was streaming through my window. It was 9 a.m. It was a Saturday. I walked downstairs. My mom was flipped pancakes, looking younger and happier than I'd ever seen her. Uncle Jerome was at the table, reading the paper. "Sleep well?" Jerome asked, winking at me. I stretched, my muscles feeling loose and strong. I thought about Mark, the man who thought he could break me by stealing my rest. I thought about how he had crumbled the moment someone his own size looked him in the eye. "Yeah," I said, sitting down to a plate of food I didn't have to earn by scrubbing a floor. I slept like a king. I realized then that Mark was right about one thing. Discipline is important. But real discipline isn't about fear or cruelty. It's about the strength it takes to protect those who can't protect themselves. Mark was all bark and no bite, but I had survived the dark, and now, I was finally ready to live in the light.